Hello there and welcome back. So thank you so much for taking this course all the way to the end. And now we're going to get to some real fun stuff. We're going to talk about strategies. And strategies, here's a definition. Art of planning and directing to generate a specific result. So, like if I was in your town and I didn't know where the grocery store was, you'd be able to give me a strategy, whether to get there by foot, if I was walking, or by car, you would give me driving directions. If I was on a bicycle, you'd give me other directions. You'd give me some kind of strategy on how to get to the grocery store because you've been there many, many times. So strategies aren't a big deal, and they come from being able to see what works. So the reason I mention that is because a lot of strategies has to do with this type of cartoon. Scientists will look at things through a microscope and they'll look at neurons and oligodendrocytes and glia cells and the limbic system and amygdala and hippocampus and all this kind of stuff, and all that stuff is important. And then, they come with their scientific conclusions, and yeah, that's great. And then they, have proof of stuff that exists, like memory reconsolidation. But then on the flip side, on the other side of the equation, there are people that aren't looking at the cellular and molecular information about data. What they're looking at is the people. So in other words, seeing what people have been successful at doing stuff. So in other words, if 6 people went to the grocery store and came back, then I would say, you know what, they all took this certain path, all took this certain route, and then you'd know if you followed that same path and their strategy, you could get to the grocery store too, just by following what successful people have done. So that's what the difference is between the scientists and people who are more like social science. Scientists are looking at things through a microscope, whereas other people have a different point of view, more of a larger perspective. So the reason I'm mentioning this is because we're getting into strategies here. Now, one of the things that's really important about strategies is looking to see who's been using them for the longest. Now, here is certainly one man that's been using them for a long time. This is Bruce Ecker. He is a family therapist, and he is also the co-founder of Coherence Therapy, and he's also the co-author of this fantastic book. It's called Unlocking the Emotional Brain, Eliminating Symptoms at Their Roots Using Memory Reconsolidation. So he had clients, and he found them, a lot of them, some would have like major clinical depression, some of them would have like they'd be a drifter the whole life, and then they'd have a session with Ecker, and he would able to basically give them this huge transformational intervention. And he found out later that the strategic sessions that he was having with his clients was also in sympathy with that memory reconsolidation intervention that was discovered by neuroscience. And so he's been using his type of therapy in a way that is very similar to memory reconsolidation, using his interventions resting on a framework of memory reconsolidation, which is why he gets such great results. Now, I want to share with you a quote about his book by Dr. David Van Nuys, who you probably heard of from his blogs, also from his podcast. He has a podcast on Shrink Wrap Radio. I want to give you a quote, what he reviewed this book. He said, "Unlocking the Emotional Brain is destined to be a landmark publication. I'm sensing an emerging consensus in the field of psychotherapy. I think memory reconsolidation and this book could be the hub around which the various approaches unite. It is essential reading for therapists of all stripes." Now, I want to share with you a couple of excerpts from it. Now, this looks like a lot of notes, but I really just want to share with you this bottom line down here where it says, "Many different types of forms of psychotherapy, as well as experiences in other contexts, sometimes succeed in creating transformational change, even when the therapist is not informed about memory reconsolidation and is unaware of fulfilling its requirements." So in other words, a person doesn't have to be a neurobiologist, they don't have to be a therapist, they don't have to be a neuroscientist in order to engage this mechanism in the brain. Sometimes people can be updating their memory files and being able to get over stuff quickly just from a story that they heard from a friend, or just from being able to watch a movie, because ultimately our brains are learning every day naturally and remolding itself and pruning away and rewiring itself all the time in response to experience. Now I want to share with you one other fascinating individual. This is Dr. Richard Bandler. And if you want to talk about a person looking at things from the other side of the equation, well, you have to talk about Dr. Richard Bandler. He is the co-founder of neurolinguistic programming. And instead of looking through a microscope, like we were seeing in that cartoon, he was looking at people who were very successful at removing phobias. So he put an ad in the paper looking for people who had a phobia and got over it to find out what they were doing. In other words, finding people who went to the grocery store and then asking them how they were able to get there, right? Getting their strategy. And so Dr. Richard Bandler was writing the strategy for how to remove phobias in his book, which came out in, I think this was 1985. Okay, so how is Richard Bandler able to use a strategy that uses the memory reconsolidation process when it hadn't even been scientifically proven for another 14, 15, 25 years or 24 years? The reason is because he wasn't looking at people through the microscope like the scientists were. He was looking at it through the examples of people that were able to have phobias and have challenges and were able to get over it. And then when he found out what they all had in common, boom, he comes up with a strategy. So that is how some strategies are formed. Now I want to share with you, because ultimately the proof is in the pudding. Dr. Richard Bandler was on a show recently to remove a phobia from Michael Strahan on the television show Live with Kelly and Michael. So here is Dr. Richard Bandler. Now, of course, this is 30 years after the publication of his book on how to remove phobias, in his book called How to Use Your Brain for a Change. So obviously Bandler is a super expert in this. He's been coaching this and teaching this and giving seminars on this and giving certificates to people who have passed all of his courses in neurolinguistic programming. And so now here he is with what is for him a very easy task of removing a phobia, because he's done this literally thousands of times. So at this moment, as you can remember in that memory reconsolidation phase, he does a brief elicitation of the problem state. So in other words, he has Michael think about that thing that makes him scared, which is snakes. So in other words, he has Michael think about the snakes, make a big picture of it like he's been doing all the time. And then Bandler puts his hand up in front of Michael's face, makes the pink picture smaller, shrinks it down, makes it black and white. Instead of putting it all up in front of Michael's face where Michael used to have it, he pretends to drag that picture down to more like his belly button. And then Bandler says to him, okay, now look back at it and try to be afraid. So in other words, he's doing some linguistic apperception here. He's using languaging to redirect where Michael Strahan was originally envisioning that phobic response. So Michael used to think about a big picture in front of him, a big picture in front of his face. Well, Bandler shrinks that picture, and then he kind of puts his fingers in front of this guy's face to get any kind of images this guy had in his mind away. And then Bandler says, look back at that snake and try to be afraid. So the presupposition here is try to be afraid. In other words, attempt and fail. And he's saying, look back at it, when he used to be looking in the front to be afraid. So Bandler has spatially moved the location of where this person was thinking about the phobia, along with putting it behind him, along with using some languaging that is like a form of conversational hypnosis that has Michael now have the phobia image be behind him. So now this is completely different. This is updating the memory. And then at this exact moment, at 2:25, this is a very epic moment, because this is where Michael Strahan in this exact second has concurrently and in the same field of awareness the image of himself being afraid of the snakes and an image of himself being brave with the snakes, having a neutral response with the snakes. Now, he has not experienced that before. He has only seen himself be scared with the snakes. So what Richard Bandler has done, he is being able to update Michael Strahan's memory mechanism. He's engaging this memory reconsolidation process, right? He's turning on the problem, and he's having Michael think of both ways. The snake with a phobia and the snakes with the neutral response. So this unlocks the encoding synapses that were creating this fear memory. Very similar to what Daniela Schiller, who is one of the scientists in the reconsolidation publication that was done, In this talk, remember how she was speaking about how a person would have a fear of the blue squares, and then they put up the blue squares without the shock, and it's that mismatch experience that allows the brain to update its systems so that the brain learns that, sometimes blue squares can be without a shock. Just like Michael Strahan can realize that, sometimes snakes don't have to be things to be afraid of. And Danielle Schiller, of course, is the scientist. She was the one that had published this memory reconsolidation experiment. This was in 2009, right? So Daniela Schiller, preventing the return of fear in humans using reconsolidation update mechanisms. And again, down here, I just want to show you where it says reconsolidation is a window of opportunity to rewrite emotional memories, and this is a non-invasive technique. And that's exactly what Richard Bandler was doing. He's employing this memory reconsolidation mechanism, turning on the problem state, updating it with basically seeing the snake without having that phobia response by creating this epic, well, I call it epic, but it's a mismatch experience so that, a person can see themselves with that phobia or with, not being able to get over a breakup or whatever it is that was haunting them from the past, while also seeing it in a completely different light. Okay, and that gives the brain that new information that says, things can be another way. You can have, we can have different emotional responses to stimuli or X or whatever that X is. And for Michael, it's snakes. So in this exact second, he's experiencing both in the same window. And then, of course, next time he sees the snake, he has a neutral response, and you can see him here. Obviously, he's no longer terrified. He's quite comfortable with the snake, and that's all thanks to Dr. Richard Bandler and his use of his memory reconsolidation strategy, which is known as the phobia removal cure, which is also known as the visual kinesthetic dissociation protocol. And so, this is actually old news. Bandler did that one on television in 2015. But people have been writing about this in Scientific American. Here it is about Daniela Schiller, and they're talking about how to erase fear in humans. And here I just want to share you one quote from Bruce Ecker, who wrote this book. He says, "New learning of any kind creates brain change in the form of new neural connections, but it is only when new learning also unwires old learning that transformational change occurs." And that's what this reconsolidation process achieves. Okay, another book I highly recommend is by Dr. Richard Bandler. He's got the 6 steps in there on how to remove a phobia. I've also created a video that talks about how to remove a phobia and something using the VKD protocol, which is a very similar thing to what Bandler does on the television show. And so there. So what have you seen so far? So, if you've had some kind of challenge that's been keeping you down, and you've been wanting to bounce back, I want you to know that, neuroplasticity, our brains can rewire itself in response to experience. And the neuroscientists have shown, Richard Davidson in particular, that the people that bounce back are the ones that have a life purpose. So a life purpose is certainly highly recommended. Second, if you remember that video talking about oligodendrocytes and the glial cells, when they looked at people who had major depressive disorder, who were dead, and people who were happy and dead, okay, so post-mortem studies, the difference was glial cells. So people who are feeling down and out and in the dumps, they don't value themselves all that much, and so there's a huge decrease in glial cells. So if you also want to bounce back, I highly suggest learning to do new things in order to increase the cell growth of glial cells. Also, post-traumatic growth, we've covered that. We know that people do bounce back. Some people takes a little bit longer. Some people are a little bit more sensitive, and so it takes them just a little bit longer time. Okay, but the bottom line is that people do bounce back from adversity. And a couple of the huge narratives that I want to, that I suggest here, one is concrete expression, and another one is a different narrative. And that, of course, is recommended by Dr. Stephen Joseph, who wrote the book What Doesn't Kill Us, which is a fantastic book about post-traumatic growth. Also, memory reconsolidation. Okay, so there is a mechanism in your brain. You can press the buttons in your brain so that you can remember your past differently and do so in ways so that it allows you to finally create the future that you'd rather be building, so you can get over the past, have your brain kind of unhook itself from the ball and chains that might have been holding you back, so that you can, unwire that emotional circuit, right? And unlearn that, so that your brain can learn how to be hitching yourself onto that type of train of thought that's much more empowering for you, right? So that mechanism in the brain is there for you to be using. And also there are strategies that uses all of this. Okay, so you can be using mental training strategies to be able to really use your brain for a change, for bouncing back. Now, with all that said, there's one last thing I'd like to offer you, and that is this. First of all, I want to thank you for taking this small course on Rockstar Resilience, the science of bouncing back. And if you found yourself liking these videos, first of all, thank you very much for that. And if not, you can still like this on Facebook. Also, I'm offering a free 20-minute coaching consult call. All right, so I want to give back and better understand what people are struggling with the most. So I'm offering you a free 20-minute laser coaching call. I'll give you a good strategy to help you turn your head around if there's something I can help you with. And on that call, I promise not to sell you anything. Okay, so if you're interested in that, I'll leave a link down there below for you to be clicking on. All right, thank you so much for your time, and bye for now.